What we're going to do today, as you know from all of our advertising about this, is take a little bit of time to think back over the last 10 years. NMPAN is officially turning 10, if I count it by our public launch, next month. And you know, a lot of things happen over 10 years, and we are really interested in thinking about a little bit about where we've come and how far we've come, not just NMPAN, but the larger world of these kind of local, sustainable, regional niche meats and poultry around us, and where are we going? What does the next 10 years look like for the sector and therefore for NMPAN? So I am the co-founder of NMPAN. I co-founded NMPAN with Arian Taboomery back in, we got the idea in 2007 and really launched in 2008. And so I'll give you a tiny bit of background, but before I do that, I want to introduce our panelists who very graciously agreed to be on the webinar today. We've got Mike Lorentz, who is the owner of Lorentz Meats in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. We've got Cory Carman, who is owner of Carman Ranch in Wallowa, Oregon. We've got Joe Cloud, who is the co-owner and general manager of True and Essential Meats in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We've got Samantha Garwin, who is president of Fleishers Craft Butchery in New York. And we've got Heather Sanford, who is the onder of the Piggery in Ithaca. And Heather, if I could ask you to turn on the light a little because we can't really see you very well. Yes, so we've got all these great folks. And so I am just going to do a very quick intro here. I'm going to quickly show. So when I was thinking back about how I would introduce this webinar, and I was sort of thinking back over the last 10 years, how we got started, why we got started, way too many stories came into my head, way too many events, way too many people that we've met, things that we've learned, and there are just way too many stories to tell today. And so I'm really only going to tell you one. And it's really about sort of the shift in thinking, the arc of the shift of thinking over the last decade. But I just want to say again, thinking back on it, I feel so lucky to have had so many people who have taught us, who have shared their stories, who have asked really hard questions, and who have really been part of this national and sometimes international network that we have for peer learning and really, you know, building the sector. And, you know, I think in some ways it's a movement. So what I want to share here, this is a screenshot of our website today, and you can see all the different materials on it. I want to take you back to 2006. I was a graduate student at University of California, Berkeley, and I did my dissertation on barriers to scale for sustainable meats, and I looked at grass-fed and organic meat and talked to a lot of producers. And I wrote this in my dissertation, thinking about processing as a critical constraint to the expansion of the alternative beef sector. I talked to a lot of ranchers. I talked to processors. I actually talked about Lorentz Meats in my dissertation without having met Mike before. But back then, I think a lot of folks were really thinking about it, and still do today, as we really have to fix processing in order to fix this sector. And then in 2007, I met Arian, and Arian at that point was a PhD student also. He was at Iowa State University doing a great combination of meat science and rural sociology. And he and I got together and founded NMPAN, and this is a picture of us at our first American Association of Meat Processors convention. And he'd been working with processors in Iowa in a working group, basically trying to address similar things about capacity for processors, because they were ready, but they were ready in spirit, but they needed some help in order to serve this growing sector. And I really had this idea about a national campaign against isolated wheel reinvention, meaning that I was talking to people all over the country who were working on similar problems, but really weren't talking to each other. And I thought there must be a way. And so cut to in 2013, we had been invited by USDA's Economic Research Service to write a report basically pointing out what was needed in order to expand the local meat sector. And they had asked us to focus on processing. And what we ended up saying is this is really about commitment. improved coordination, commitment, and communication between processors and farmers, really dedicated business relationships. And that was a real change in thinking for us, or the way that we talked about it. And we've really been, we reframed how we did things sort of before that. And that was sort of a point there where that we really use that to try to help people think through the whole supply chain rather than just we've got to fix processing. And so I just want to come back here finally to say, here we are in 2018. We have this amazing network of people. I've circled down here in red the listserv. The listserv is just amazing to me. After being part of it for 10 years, I love all the questions that come in. They're very small, they're very big, they're very direct, they're very indirect. But all these people around the country are helping solve each other's problems. And it's really fantastic. So I have done a terrible job at photographing our advisory board over the years. This was from Virginia Firm, a meeting, and this is just the point that we've had amazing advisors. Our members are everywhere. This is from the most recent evaluation. And NMPAN is doing good work for them. And when I say NMPAN, just a tiny part of NMPAN. Everybody on this call is part of NMPAN, and NMPAN has really done all of these great things. And I really like this thing about renewing my sense of excitement to be in this industry. A third of people said that. That was fantastic. And this is the final thing I want to share, is that our goal has always been to provide a 360-degree view. And this is what somebody said in one of the evaluations in the last year. And I really feel glad that that's where we're at. So with that, I want to take us back to our panelists, now that I've sort of set the stage for why NMPAN started. Like I said, there's so many stories, there's so many people. Anytime you catch me and want to hear a long story, I'm happy to share it. But right now I want to jump to all these amazing folks on our panel. And what we're going to do is we are going to we're going to talk in around 3 questions. We're going to ask a question about the past, and a question about the present, and a question about the future. And we're going to spend about 15 minutes on each of those questions, having our panelists address them. We'd like folks to post questions in the chat box, and we will get to those along the way, or we have dedicated time at the end. And I also see that my co-founder and other parent of NMPAN, Arian, has joined as an attendee. So Arian, I hope you will pop in and say many wise and witty things in the chat box. So let's start out with the first question, which is, how has your business evolved over the last 10 years? How has the local sustainable meat and poultry sector changed during that time? And all of you had the questions before. So Joe, you want to kick us off? We got to get him unmuted.
So Joe, yeah, if you'll unmute yourself, lower left-hand corner inside Zoom.
Okay, am I good?
You're good.
Okay, so Joe Cloud here, and so as Lauren said, I'm the co-owner, along with Joel Salatin, of Polyface Farms, of T&E Meats. We go by the shorthand, True and Essential Meats, in the Shenandoah Valley in Western Virginia. And we are just behind NMPAN in age. We began July 1st, 2008, so it'll be our 10th anniversary in a few months. And I gave up a 20-year consulting career in planning and landscape architecture for a change of pace and to move back home, look after older folks, and knew Joel. And through discussions, we decided that we were going to buy this existing business. And we did that, and I've been running it ever since and learned a crazy amount. It was owned by a family for about 35 years, was built around a retail and wholesale delivery. It was a small plant, built in 1939. They were USDA inspected for slaughter, principally because they slaughtered a lot of hogs for themselves for their fresh sausage business. And we purchased it for the processing capacity. there was very little going on in Virginia at that time. It had been a new plant had opened in 2003, I think, and then we started, and since then a number of small plants have opened and gone under inspection. So that has really changed. And in 2011, we closed the retail store, and got rid of wholesale. We'd grown processing up enough that we were able to survive on that. And we've grown on average, I guess if you look at it over the last 10 years, about 15% a year for processing. And we're kind of maxed out. And we just did, the only value-added things we did were fresh sausages, but we broke ground 2 weeks ago on a major expansion that's going to allow us to put in our first smokehouse and do value-added processing, which is kind of a blue sky thing for Virginia. There's really almost nothing that you can schedule or depend on. So we're excited about that. I think, when we started, we had 4 private labels, and we focus on being co-packing. We don't do any buying and selling. And now at any given moment, we have something like 80 farms with their own label that's going into business. And the focus, we've been really rebuilding the building, paying for equipment and increasing the quality, really completely rebuilding the workforce. All of that's been one of the biggest stories, is just rebuilding the facility and the professionalism of it. It was quite low in the state 10 years ago, and I think we're the best, but we compete with others too, so I think that's really one of the biggest stories. And recently about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, we started seeing the appearance of aggregators in the market that our farmers are now putting stuff into, and really focusing on getting it up to Northern Virginia, DC, Richmond, the big cities. So I think, that's what's going on. Someone else.
Great.
Talk.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Yeah, I wish that we could have all of you talk for about a half an hour on each of these questions. We have to keep going. Thank you, Joe. Samantha.
All right. I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Awesome. So I'm the CEO of Fleishers, and Fleishers is sometimes referred to as an old school butcher shop with modern day ideals. So we were founded in 2004 in the Hudson River Valley in New York State. And Fleishers was really one of the first retail stores to go back to traditional ways of sourcing. So by traditional ways of sourcing, I mean local, sustainably raised whole animals coming direct from the farmer. And then we're selling them over a counter, which in these days is kind of unusual. It's a very high-touch customer experience, and we have kept those ways of sourcing and selling throughout our almost 14-year history now. So today, Fleishers comprises, we have 4 retail butcher shops, and we work with a network of farmers and processors and value-added partners to try to create a whole food system in the Northeast where environmental and ethical responsibility are the rule rather than the exception. So over the last 14 years, we've really changed a lot. I think more than any other retail company, we have really iterated pretty extensively to try to find the mix of vertical integration and partnerships that will create what every retail store wants, which is a consistent, high-quality product for our customers at a reasonable price. And ideally, you do this in a way where you make a little money and you don't totally burn out your employees, which I know is a risk throughout the meat industry. So I have some notes here. I can talk a little bit about the various iterations we've gone into. I'll try to keep it pretty quick, but we have kind of done a lot of different things in an attempt to get this meat from the farm to the customer in the best way possible. So Starting in 2004, we were a single mom and pop butcher shop. We did everything ourselves, from picking up the meat at slaughterhouse to doing our own prepared foods. In 2008, we started doing our own wholesale runs from Kingston to New York City. So that's like a 4-hour trip. 2013, we decided we would open up a facility in Red Hook, Brooklyn to be a central commissary. In 2011, we opened our second butcher shop in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and we used our Kingston shop as a commissary. 2013, we opened up our Red Hook commissary to be used as a fulfillment center and processing area for both Kingston and Park Slope, and we also moved our wholesale business down there, of course. In 2014, we actually merged with another butcher shop in Westport, Connecticut, which at that time had a small to-go lunch counter, which we then converted into a full-service restaurant. In 2015, we opened up our fourth butcher shop in Greenwich, Connecticut, and that also had a to-go lunch counter. We ramped up our apprenticeship program and classes programming, and then we piloted catering, contract grazing, and packaged goods, and laid the groundwork for converting our Red Hook facility from a New York Ag and Markets inspected facility into a USDA inspected processing facility. In 2016, we did that. We converted that Red Hook facility from a commissary kitchen into a USDA processing facility and transitioned our ready-to-eat foods and value-added to co-packers, and opened up our fifth retail butcher shop on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and ramped up our wholesale program pretty significantly. And we also, very briefly but seriously, considered buying a slaughterhouse. And then in 2017, this past year, we actually, we kind of decided that we were going to focus a little bit more. So we'd spread ourselves pretty thin, as I just described. We did all kinds of stuff over the last 13 years, 14 years. And so this past year, we actually focused down into just selling direct to consumer and doing education with those consumers. So we actually spent the last year divesting of anything that was not that. So now today we are no more restaurants, no more wholesale, except for what fits under the retail exempt limit from our stores. No apprenticeship program, although we do have public facing classes still. No more contract grazing. And all of that is to say that I think we're at the point where the industry has evolved, that more people and businesses are specializing and doing one thing really well rather than trying to do everything ourselves. And we think that that's a good thing, because it means we have choices, it means we have competition, which makes all of us better, and an overall more resilient system. So I hope that wasn't too long, but that's where we are today.
No, that's great. And the way that you wrap that up in terms of how the industry has shifted, I think that everybody on this call everybody, all the panelists can talk about how much of the supply chain they need to and don't want to have to manage, but different options for that. Why don't we turn to you, Cory? Thank you, Samantha.
Hi, I'm Cory Carman, and it's great to hear everyone else's stories. Mine is a little bit different. I was motivated by coming back to our family ranch. The ranch has been in my family for 100 years. And so I moved back in 2003 thinking, direct marketing was going to be the next sort of iteration of how the business at the ranch has evolved. And that took me down a crazy and fun path where I met Lauren and learned a lot about meat processing. So 2003, we were selling whole carcasses, custom exempt. 2006, we started our wholesale business, and that has grown incrementally over time. We distribute primarily in Portland. We have a little bit of direct-to-consumer sales, but we're about 95% wholesale, and again, most of that in Portland, Oregon. We started just using our own animals, and then over time added other producers in Loudoun County, and now we do a year-round fresh program. And so we work directly with a handful of producers mostly in the Pacific Northwest. So that's our model, and it's been, it's really fun. It keeps us on our toes, kind of as Samantha was saying, to see how the industry's evolved. I think the biggest difference for us is going from explaining what grass-fed is to a point where now we really emphasize there's enough grass-fed in the market that we really emphasize attributes beyond that, and we're differentiating ourselves in terms of how we talk about local and regional supply chains. There's just a much deeper understanding among buyers of what the value proposition is to differentiated meat, and that it's evolving every day, and I think it will continue, which I'd like to see those of us who have been in this industry for a long time be the drivers in those conversations. So yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Thank you, Cory. It's been really amazing for me to be out here in Oregon and to have watched from a distance how Cory's business has evolved over the years and learned from her and about how all that works from her perspective. So thank you for letting us all watch. Let's see. Let's hear from Heather.
Okay, unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, and the reason that Heather is sort of dark here is because she is in the USDA office in her plant, and she can't do anything about the lighting. And I already joked that she was in the witness protection program.
Thanks, all. Yeah, so kind of a funny story is our USDA plant used to be an old car wash, and so there are hardly any windows here, which makes things kind of dark sometimes. But trust me, it is full of bustling activity, and this is the quietest place I could find. It is like a little back office. So my name is Heather Sanford, and I'm one of the owners and founders, farmers and butchers here at the Piggery in Ithaca, New York. We've been in business since 2007. My husband and I farm about 100 acres in Trumansburg, New York. 70 of that is certified organic, and we raise just heritage breed hogs as well as turkeys there. We have one other partner farm that we work with called JD Farms, and we've been working with them for close to 10 years as well. And they raise half of our hogs, and we have a new grass-fed beef program with them as well. So they're really exciting farmers for us to work with. As far as processors, so many things have changed for us over the last decade. Brad and I pretty much taught ourselves how to cut meat in the basement of our farmhouse in Trumansburg. And how the landscape has changed is when we were interested in bringing our farm's animals to market, we had a waiting list of close to a year to 2 years to get any processing space here in upstate New York. So we started researching all the regulatory laws and realized that we could find slaughter dates just for the basic kill and to get the half carcasses back, but we couldn't get anybody who had time in their schedule to cut and wrap for us. And if we had a New York State Ag and Markets license back then, just like a grocery store, we would be allowed to operate as a kind of a small scale butcher shop. So our process is that almost every day in the week that we'd get up and do chores, we'd work with our animals, and then once a week we would send two pigs over to the slaughterhouse. I would go pick them up in the pickup truck. We'd cut meat in the basement and bring it all to the farmer's market. A lot of challenges there for everybody who works in whole animal butchering and trying to use the animal consistently across the whole carcass. We never to this day have really frozen any meat. We've been fresh meat whole animal butchers ever since. Our journey, a lot like I think Fleishers, has taken us in a lot of different dips and turns as we find the right way to operate in this marketplace. For one of our first iterations to our now standalone retail butcher shop was a drive-through coffee space in Ithaca, New York, where we served drive-through espresso out one window and had a small meat counter in the front where we could overcome the costs of running a retail operation and stay liquid. And that kind of grew into a restaurant that we had here in Ithaca, New York, which again helped us with manning our retail shop and balancing our carcasses. And then lastly, about 4 years ago, gosh, almost 5 now, we went and built out a full USDA facility where our restaurant was and kind of revamped into our retail space, which is under a 20C New York State Ag and Markets license, into a full-fledged local butcher shop and grocery store. And then we have a wholesale business now under USDA, and we ship meat from Maine all the way down to North Carolina, and then our line goes as far west as Minnesota right now, which is pretty exciting. If you guys aren't familiar with our line, we're heavily involved in the value-added side of the business. So we're known for our nitrate-free deli meats. We do a lot of bacons. We do charcuteries and fresh meats. We just got Project Non-GMO verified, which we're super excited about. Animal welfare approved. So we're kind of getting ready to come back into the marketplace with a lot of new products. And then the biggest change for us is going from processing in the basement of my house to selling it at all my farmers markets to kind of going national at this point. One big change for us is just culturally, we've always been whole animal butchers. And something that we just let go of recently is had our very first co-packing project up at Artisan Meats in Vermont. And that was so exciting. We have our first dry-aged, shelf-stable sausages, which for a long time I kept on trying to shoehorn that process into our plant here, and we're just too small. So we're going to continue working with them, and then we're also going to work with a few new co-packers who have better and bigger equipment than us to help us balance our line and our production. So that's kind of who the Piggery is. That's where we've been, and kind of I think where we're going to in the dark.
Great. No. Eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So, Mike, let's wrap it up with you. I have to say before Mike speaks, I was looking back at what I had written in 2005, 2006, and was so struck by, I had interviewed one of the executives at NMPAN Ranch at that point, and they had come from a 2004 National Association of Meat Processors meeting, because NAF used to be one of the trade associations, and he told me that, well, we're really seeing that there are going to be more mid-scale plants coming up because that's really a trend. And I think Mike is probably thinking, yeah, well, how many more of the, how many plants the size of Lorentz are we really seeing? Mm-hmm. So with that, Mike, speak to us.
Great, thanks. Well, sorry I'm the odd man out and not having my video camera, but that would have required me being aware enough this morning when I left the house to grab my laptop. And I left the house a little bit too early to be that aware. So anyway, the story about our company is my parents founded Lorentz Meats in 1968 when they bought the local locker plant. We ran that locker plant as a custom exempt plant up until 97 when my brother and I took over. And in 97, when we were thinking about what we wanted to do as a small company in a small town in rural Minnesota, we were thinking about, we basically decided our best chance is to work with farmers and help them do direct sale. So since 1997, we've been trying to focus on direct sale. So we built a new plant in 2000 where it was USDA inspected. And we got friends and family together to invest in our company, and we leveraged debt from about anybody that would loan us money, and built a 10,000 square foot USDA inspected facility. That we worked that for quite a few years, went through the dark valley of unprofitability. In 2005, we sold our retail store. In 2008, we finally established consistent profitability. So it took us a while to get up on plane with this new plant. Our focus all along had been trying to help farmers sell their meat direct to consumers. So we've tried all sorts of different farmers markets and selling to grocery stores and all the different iterations of that direct sale. And finally, when we really started to gain traction is when we started to get larger aggregators and bigger customers to get enough volume. And really what Arian and Lauren identified in their USDA paper, that we really started getting customers make commitments to us. They delivered the animals they promised to deliver to us. We delivered the meat back to them when they promised to when we promised it. And that commitment was just really the cornerstone to us building the business to a viable, sustainable business. So that took, up until 2008, we really struggled to get to profitability, and we finally started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. 2010, Arian joined our staff as a vice president here in Minnesota. In 2012, Organic Valley made a significant investment into Lorentz Meats. We were able to buy out our friends and family that originally invested in us. We made a significant addition. We went from the 10,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet. Then right after that, in 2013, we partnered with Arian, and he moved out to Vermont and opened a plant in North Springfield, Vermont, which is about a 20 to 30,000 square foot facility now, and he's been running that since 2013. So we were quite a ways into this when NMPAN started. So how did we see the business evolve over the last 10 years, I think is one of the questions presented. And, we've seen our business over double here in Minnesota, and we've added the facility in Vermont. Really excited about all the opportunities as the market grows. Have learned so much about how all best intentions aside, we have to still be competitive in the business place. I think that we have a lot of people marketplace that are really driven by great ethic and great commitment to doing things right. I think one of the saddest things that I look at as I reflect backwards is all those good intentions aren't good enough in many cases, so we still have to run profitable businesses. I'm really happy to see the number of people that have figured it out, but we have a real opportunity to grow, and as long as we keep working together and identify that our biggest challenge is the big meat companies, not each other, and not the group that's participating in NMPAN, I think we're all going to be okay.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Definitely appreciate your perspective from this. And I always feel that we're doing something right because you still answer the phone when I call most of the time.
Yeah, I always try.
Well, thanks all of you. And it's great to have that background. There are some questions that have come up in the chat box for specific panelists. And I think what I'd like to do is just keep moving through the questions, and then we'll try to do our best to do the Q&A. But I know that there are so many, all of you have brought up so many interesting things, and there's lots of things that folks want to know about your experiences. So we may have to do a follow-up. So let's talk about, we can do this a little bit shorter. How has participation in NMPAN made a difference for you? And if you can give us an example, that would be great. So who wants to start? Anyone want to jump in?
I went last, so I'll go first.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Well, I really, back when we made the commitment in '97 to work with local farmers, we got involved with a group called the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota, and that group was all based on peer-to-peer knowledge and sharing with each other. And we have a big commitment here of that peer-to-peer knowledge, and we have a lot of small plants that call us and ask us for technical expertise and feedback, and we really, really value the opportunity to participate in those conversations, and I think NMPAN has been a great format for getting to be included in those conversations. And, and we've met a lot of great operators and great marketers through the association, through being associated with NMPAN. So that's what we value about it.
Great, thank you. How about you, Heather?
Yep. Going back to the unmuting function, it's been such a great resource for us. We have a very, very small USDA plant here. We're under 3,000 square feet. And so over the years, as we've kind of built out different iterations of our 20 state ag and markets facility, as well as our USDA, the website has been a great resource as far as like case studies and actual kind of ideas and mapping plans for facilities, because we drew our own facility. We didn't have a consultant. We also did our own HACCP from scratch. So that would be one of the biggest gains for us, for sure, is being part.
Great, thank you. Cory.
I love your national campaign against wheel reinvention. I think that describes the NMPAN perfectly. I have reached out so many times. Obviously, I come to the meat world from a production standpoint, and learning as you go. And every time we had a crisis, every time we had processors come back with feedback that didn't make any sense, every time we had challenges with USDA, being able to reach out to NMPAN. Fat ratios of ground beef, there's so much stuff that you run into, and having NMPAN as a resource is amazing. So I think the listserv, but also we've used NMPAN to find consultants to help us get through projects. So thank you, guys.
Great. That's really great. How about you, Samantha?
So when we ran our own processing facility, NMPAN was completely invaluable in terms of helping us learn the ropes, getting questions answered on how we should work with FSIS, how to solve common problems. I think it's fair to say we could not have opened our own processing plant and been successful without it. But even now that we don't run our own processing facility, it's still useful to see what kinds of issues are coming up. So I will admit that I am not the one who's on NMPAN forums quite as regularly anymore, but Trevor Bundy, who's on this call right now, is runs our protein supply chain, all the logistics and all the relationships with the processors and farmers still. And he, stays up to date on what's going on, because the better we can understand the challenges our processors are facing, the more smoothly we can work with them. And by that, I just mean we can ask fewer stupid questions, hopefully, and make fewer unreasonable demands, and just in general, understand where they're coming from, so that we can all work together better and find ways of reducing friction throughout the system, and hopefully gaining economies of scale and making things easier for everyone.
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line of what NMPAN tries to provide, is exactly that. And I'm glad to hear that that's how you've been able to use it. It's that understanding across the supply chain, really, and the willingness of people to participate and share that. So I'm glad that is working. Joe. Oh, we have to unmute you, Joe.
I know. I'm sorry. I did something to my screen and I couldn't find the unmute button. Well, I think basically what I took just a wild leap of faith into the meat business in 2008, and it was such a departure from my previous life, and I moved across the country to do it. So it's very easy to get isolated and not know anybody in that new world. And I think everything that everybody has said, I would echo. There's so many different things in that 360 degree, but just meeting people, getting to know who people are, who individuals were, and learning about them, and learning, how I could reach out to them. And so that was really terrific for me. I really appreciated the opportunity. It was a few years ago. I think, Lauren, you worked with me about my approach towards employee training and motivation and workforce development, and that got put into the paper that's on the site. So I really appreciated the opportunity to tell, to share some of the things that I was doing to do it, because that's just such an important thing in the business. You can't hire a trained employee. You literally cannot hire a trained employee. And where I am, I have to train everybody. And and I think that's the way we are in the industry at this point in time. And then I'd like to share one other little quick story, and that is one of the most fun things that I ever did through NMPAN is that's when Catherine left and was up in Alaska, and I got to do a few days of brainstorming with her about how to help a native corporation build a reindeer plant out on some island in the Bering Sea. I can't remember the name of it. Catherine would remember. I don't know. It has a planner, having worked with a number of native corporations up there and been out to Nome in that area. I kind of had some insights of how you could put meat processing in place out there, but who knows where it'll take you, right?
Well, and I think that's the key here, is that when Arian and I started the peer consulting, there had always been peer consulting through the listserv and through informal phone calls, but to actually be able to buy out a little bit of experienced people's time in order to focus on these more in-depth questions, I think has been, really useful, because the wealth of knowledge in this network is amazing to me. So I really appreciate all of that. I mean, it's sort of embarrassing, you sit here and you think, well, did I invite all these people to just, gush about what we've done for the last 10 years? But really, it's not fully self-serving, because it's actually pushing us toward the next question, which is, well, what the heck is coming? What trends do you see for the local sustainable meat sector going forward? And how do you think your business is adapting and is going to adapt to those trends? And where should NMPAN be going next? The null hypothesis, as it were, is just keep doing what we're doing. But are there ways that we, and I don't just mean Rebecca and me and our advisors, but all of us who are part of NMPAN, how should we be adapting and changing going forward to support your businesses and others like you in a changing environment? So mix up a little bit here and go with Heather. Why don't you go first? Oh, we can't hear you yet.
Well, shoot, that was so good what I just said. I'll try to say it again. Okay, as soon as you asked that question, the first thing that I wrote down in my notes was oversupply. That's where I kind of see the current challenges and the trends in our industry. And then above that, I wrote regional oversupply. So this could just be a regionalized issue in upstate New York, but I am starting to hear from a lot of my farmer friends, as well as see in our local and regional marketplace, too many amazing farmers offering the niche kind of farming that we all are starting to trend towards, which are organic, pasture-raised, non-GMO, / natural sort of category. A lot of the farmers markets are becoming too crowded. I think that the demand is absolutely still growing in the marketplace with consumers, and I feel that what trend that we're bumping up against is, again, lack of distribution and access to those consumers. So that's where I personally see the next bottleneck happening in trend in our industry. I hope that all makes sense.
Yes, and Catherine, our first program manager, the first person we ever were able to hire to help us beyond Arian and me, is probably nodding her head, because she and Cory have said that to me before, about the distribution piece. So thank you for that. Cory, you want to hop on after that? You don't have to say the same thing.
You and I have talked a little bit, Lauren, about, and I think on your point, Heather, I really think the future of our industry will be connecting a lot of these regional players. I think there's a lot of strength in regional brands, and there's a lot of authenticity and transparency, which is what consumers are looking for. But our ability to merchandise an entire carcass in a specific region that has a specific demand profile is really challenging. And so I think we're going to reach efficiency. We might see more aggregators come into play to help us merchandise the carcass. And I also think that we as regional players will increasingly depend on platforms like NMPAN, where these conversations have already been started, to connect in other ways and try to create efficiencies. And that actually to me is really exciting, because I've always loved through NMPAN to see what other people are doing and have exposure to some of the great ideas. And I think a lot of us have evolved our businesses and built out different types of capacities. So to the degree that these businesses can start connecting, whether it's to trade product or maybe even to collaborate around different operational capacities that individual businesses can afford, I think that's, to me, that's the most promising place that NMPAN could start reaching out and helping in other aspects of the supply chain.
Now I'm unmuting myself. Thank you. Yes, and all suggestions on how to do that are going to be welcome for sure. Mike, would you like to jump in on this thread or another? What's the future look like?
All right. Well, I'm really excited and bullish about the market. I think people want what the products that we're all working on selling. So the good news is we have plenty of market available for us. The challenge is I would agree with the challenge being access to it. And from my vantage point as primarily a processor and somebody that's working with farmers and aggregators, I see a lot of that is a lot of the challenge is around getting right-sized. So we think that what we need to do is continue to grow and try to find that right size where we have the competent staff and the right compliance and all that other stuff, where we can get help our customers get their products to those consumers. So that's the biggest challenge that we see. We're going to continue on working on growing and trying to hit that right spot. The thing that we see for NMPAN to do within that is, one of the concerns that I have moving forward is the regulatory challenges that we as small plants see that are slightly different than our larger competitors. And I love to see the work that NMPAN is doing on continuing to move that conversation forward. I think that's a great benefit to us as we talk about those discrepancies in how rules are applied from big plants to small plants. And I think that we within the industry that are doing it need to continue on growing our own personal capacities, that we're better able to articulate our position from an individual plant standpoint. Meanwhile, be open to sharing information amongst one another as we all try to address these common challenges that we have while we deal with FSIS and other regulatory agencies that we have to deal with as small business owners.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Yeah, here I am thinking about it, but I need to move on to ask Samantha.
So I think that our customers, the end consumers, are, as everyone else has said, really evolving to understand why they should be buying local sustainable meat. We see a lot of people dipping their toes in. We don't, our goal is to be everyone's, normal everyday provider of meat. But realistically, right now, we see a lot of people shopping with us for holidays or special occasions or, dinner parties, but they don't consider it an everyday thing. And I hope and expect this to continue to shift. My fear is that if and when we hit a tipping point, that we won't be ready. And I think that it's when you see these big, the holidays, that you put stress on the system and you do start to see things break down when it comes to either, literal breakdowns of equipment like scalders or, issues with distribution where when you have those big influxes, they can't handle swings in the market. And so that's what makes me afraid that we won't be ready. And so I think we should be using those times when things break as, that's an opportunity to see where the links are weak and to fix those things rather than saying like, oh, it was a one-off. Well, it's a one-off now, but as we grow, it won't be a one-off anymore. That'll be the new normal. So with our customers, Fleishers is continuing to try to remove some of those barriers to entry to shop at a small butcher shop. So consistency, selection, or availability and convenience. I see those as being big barriers to our end consumers shopping with us. But similarly, we are the customers for farmers and processors. So we are the ones who are buying things from the people who are further back in the supply chain than we are. And we're really we're hoping to see more folks aggregate their resources. And by that, I mean animals, knowledge, logistics, as everyone else has said, to help reduce that friction and prices to us so that we can help reduce friction and prices to our customers. Because I do think, as Mike has said, that we want to grow the overall size of the market and the pie is still very small and we can make a bigger pie and there's room for everyone here on this call and everyone in the NMPAN forums if we work together.
Thanks, Samantha. I mean, you all are pointing out really, sort of important maturation of the sector questions. And what comes to mind for me, and then we're going to turn to you, Joe, is that at the same time that we're looking forward with businesses like yours, I'm sitting here in Oregon, and at this time every year, I'm getting phone calls from around the region saying, we need new processing plants. Okay, how many animals do you have? Well, we have 150. Okay, so it's an interesting bifurcation of there's always a continued need to have those conversations about what really is enough capacity and who is really buying your product to this much more sophisticated, we're developing this industry, like businesses like yours are doing that. And so what support is needed. So thank you. This is all really useful. Joe, why don't you wrap up this question for us?
Well, yeah, I've got a few things to say about it. I'd really echo what Heather and Mike said about scalability is really grappling with scalability and those issues and growth are really where we're at. I mean, I'm too big and I'm too small kind of all the time. And there's massive demand up in DC. There's almost no logistics for getting it. We keep getting feelers from all kinds of folks, that either retailers or aggregators that want more product, but there's just nobody out there that can provide that can hit the supply, regular supply consistency. The farmers are not talking to each other very much. I don't see any effort to sort of create co-ops or what have you in our region, and I think that's going to need to happen. And so how do you solve all of those problems? That's really going to be very challenging for us to be able to grow. And then I'm expanding right now, but I'm afraid that because I'm adding further processing, I'm going to have eaten up all that new capacity in about 2 years. And I don't know where the finances are going to come to get to the next increment of growth. So scale, that's a real thing. A related thing is that no one's mentioned is technology. We're going to have to start adopting better technologies. We've got farmers that want to get into supply chains, and nowadays you've got to have barcoding and digital traceability, that sort of thing. We're going to be acquiring a system this year, but that's going to push my capacity to train my people to the limit, I think, because it's not a terribly sophisticated workforce. And those are expensive and complex systems. So I do have some concerns about that, but we absolutely have to start doing that. I think a third growth thing, I mean, this is really, Heather seems to have captured this, the further processing. Like I say, in Virginia, there's almost no capacity whatsoever. We are really hoping to add that and pretty excited about it. I think that finding ways to teach and train individual, I can't hire anybody that knows how to do that in my area, in my region. So I've got a retired gentleman that's helping us, and we're going to bootstrap it. And it's going to be a bit of a rough ride, I think, the first little while, but I think it'll be okay. So those are three major areas: scalability, technology, and further processing. But I would add one thing too I mean, go on, but where the niche meat processors could help, as I'm being a design and construction, adding more capability to be a design and construction resource. As I'm working with a local architect and doing our expansion, but where I'm really feeling, I mean, I've got a design degree from Harvard University School of Design, and I feel like I'm flailing at times with this. I don't know really where to turn to get all of my questions answered in terms of finishes, found the, endless supply of questions, cooler technologies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you could possibly do more to be an important resource there.
Okay. Duly noted. Yeah, seriously. And sometimes what happens is I think about, there's a resource that we have, whether it's the small plant design guide that Ariane wrote with Nick McCann years ago at Iowa State. But how do we build on that? And sometimes we do it by finding, developing new resources. And sometimes we do it by finding expertise in our network who together can answer questions like that. But you point out a really important question. It's not just about our aggregation and distribution infrastructure. Sometimes it's really about the plant itself in terms of technology.
Vendors own so much of this now, and it's hard to find a place that there's a central thing where, you used to be able to go to the architectural design manual or something like that, and they had a huge number of different examples, but now there's so much proprietary stuff. And it's
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you. That was, those are all excellent, and I'm going to have this webinar transcribed, so it's all, written down in front of me. I can't get enough. What I want to do now is we've had some great questions come in over from the audience. I also want to encourage panelists, if you have questions for each other, you can kind of raise a hand about that. We'll try to take some the questions have been coming in two different directions. Folks have been asking it through the Q&A area and also here in the chat box. So there were questions earlier about buying from an aggregator supplier or from individual farmers. Samantha, I don't know if you've addressed some of that.
Yes, some of it. So at this point, most of our farmers are doing some level of aggregation. That usually just means that they have, they have varying levels of control of animals on multiple farms, and you can't be all places at once. So I consider that to be aggregation. A non-aggregation would be everything in one place. This is, pigs or lamb or beef spread out on multiple farms. I would say the beef and the lamb farmers we buy from, we talk to one person, and that person does the aggregation, and they take care of all the affidavits and all the, certifications and all the paperwork and that thing. But I think this is where I like to talk about, we are somebody's customer, like we're their customer, and they're making it easy for us by taking care of their certifications and their farming stuff. And they've made it so we have one point person to talk to. And that works really, really, really well for us, because we need to focus on running a retail business. And that's like a whole thing that requires, figuring out how to run. And I guess I'll tie in one of the other questions, which is like Vince was asking about how have regulators treated our butchery workshops. And I'm actually not clear whether you mean classes, the classes that we run, or whether you mean like the fact that we're cutting meat in a retail setting. But I will say that cutting meat in a retail setting actually adds running a retail business, there are entire books just written about like how to run a retail store in terms of merchandising and, even if you're just selling widgets and not meat. So we really have decided that if we want to be a retail store, to Mike's point about needing to be financially sustainable, like we need to get the basics of retail down. And so what we find is good about working with aggregators is there's usually someone who's not just worried about farming, but worried about that, but that's handling the paperwork of sending invoices on time and sending the proper animal weights and being able to forecast. So that is their business, and they handle that side, and then we handle ours. And there's one person who's the interface between, and that works really well for us.
Great, thank you, Samantha. Mm-hmm. There's a question here that Heather said she would answer about budgeting and the percentage necessary to set aside for branding and marketing. And unmute.
I always forget that part. Yeah, I thought that I would take this one. So our business is a little bit under $3 million a year in sales at this point, with 70% being our wholesale, and again, selling between Maine, North Carolina, as far west as Minneapolis, and the other 30% being direct retail in our own community here. And as of now, we've developed this business the last 4 years. My annual budget right now for direct marketing is about $8,000. And so I wanted to share that number because it's pretty small based on the number of sales we do, to encourage other people that you don't need to have a gigantic branding or marketing budget to really accomplish some really significant sales. My logo was made by a college kid here at Cornell, and a friend designed our packaging. So I'm really excited, and I think that we can all draw on other resources in our community to help us if need be. That said, one thing that's been really important to us, which is considered like a budget line item, is that we distribute our meat through about 12 different distributors right now. And on average, they take between like a 15 to 30% markup. So I would consider that kind of a marketing budget, but they are pretty much our sales team, and that's how we budget for that. And we'll do and as far as how I spend my $8,000 to $10,000 a year, it's really just been all on online sales, whether it's like Facebook, Instagram, and those kind of promotions. So that's how we budget for the work that we do.
Great, thank you. Let's see, there's a question here. There's a couple questions that have come up about regulatory requirements. And what's your primary source of information, and what's hardest about regulations in terms of economic loss? Anyone want to address that?
I get so it's a question about like how much the regulations and how much we have to budget for that.
Or yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
essentially, what are your challenges? And I think Mike, needed to make sure that there was, sort of even regulatory burden across different scales. And are there specific things, rather than just regulations are tough, are there specific things that are challenging?
I mean, there's definitely payroll that you have to set aside for managing a USDA plant. We average about 20 to 25 hours of log and bookkeeping, and then on top of that, probably another good 10 to 15 of just direct contact with our USDA inspectors. And then you need to budget for things like monthly listeria tests, and then we have a line of shelf-stable goods. So we also do water activity testing, and those are all federally regulated kind of programs and tracking. To date, knock on wood, we haven't had any recalls or major kind of meat retention at this point, so there haven't been any losses that way. But just the manpower day to day can be kind of costly.
Any other thoughts on this? I mean, I think one of the things oops, we're having a mute problem. One of the things that I had heard early on from both Arian and Mike was, at a certain point, you have to get to enough of a scale that you can afford the professional staff you need to manage the regulatory compliance. And sometimes it's regulatory compliance, sometimes it's the third-party certifications that you need for certain kinds of buyers. So other thoughts on that from this crew?
I would say one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that in Virginia, I'm a TA state, and so Talmadge Aiken Act. And all my frontline inspectors are Virginia Department of Agriculture employees. And I think that makes a difference for us. That I've heard from other states that their state inspectors are maybe tougher than the USDA, but in our situation, I think that we work very well together. And I don't have to go to a regional office that's out of state to get I can get a face-to-face within 24 hours. That's just worth pointing out. I mean, maybe I'm kind of almost like going yeah to all of you guys that aren't in that situation, but to what degree you can influence that, I don't know. So there's the regulatory aspect of it, but then there is also a political situation. So I think just that's something to think about. And it doesn't help with the immediate frustrations, but it is more maybe perhaps big picture. But those things do matter. So.
Mm-hmm. I think that the person who was asking the question is posted here. Who do you ask when you have a regulatory question, and what actions taken by FSIS to make the most money?
Well, there is the ask FSIS desk. I mean, it sounds like that person, to look at what was typed, is that they're going through the chain of command or going to their regional office and stuff like that. But there is the Ask FSIS help desk in DC that you can go directly to. I would also pursue that.
And I would just like to point out that we have been having some talks with top officials at FSIS and trying to get some things squared away. There's a whole section on policy engagement on our website about that. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I do think that you mentioned, when I said that getting the right size, I think that part of getting the right size is having enough volume going through the building that you can afford to have professional staff that does handle your compliance issues. That I do think that I used to always say that if you think USDA is your biggest problem, you got bigger problems. You just aren't aware of them. And now the more time that we spend in the world and the more plants that we talk to, there is a difference between good inspectors and bad inspectors. And there are plants that are burdened with bad inspectors. There are areas that have bad district offices. So it isn't even throughout the country, and your particular situation may be somewhat isolated within the interaction of the people that are involved in it. But I will say, having that professional backup, having a consultant that you trust, that you can bring in from time to time to give you a fresh look, is all an important part of it. But you need to have somebody on staff that has the time to keep on top of things. I think that's the biggest part.
And I think I would just add to that another great lesson is the large plants appeal everything immediately when it happens. So how do we build up our capacity and our ability to feel confident that, you know, small and very small plants can push back using those mechanisms that are in place when they feel that something is happening that isn't justified by the regulations. So that's another piece of it. Another piece of professional development.
Right. We had a FSA a few years back, and I remember in the exit meeting of the FSA, the USDA person that was there said, you know, I love doing these things at plants your size because, like, when I go to Hormel, there's, you know, 3 lawyers and 5 other people that are compliance specialists that are, you know, criticizing my every word. And with you guys, I just get to tell you what needs to be done. And I remember my takeaway from the meeting is, I want 3 lawyers and several people that are experts in the meeting. That's where I want to get to. So we need to get on an even playing field. So how do we, you know, work together to find ways that we, they can't just roll over us because we're easy and we're, you know, with me, I remember the days when I was trying to make payroll and you had to talk to a USDA person, and it was so hard to switch your brain from, I have this business to run, that now I have this third party that's come in and wants to tell me how to run my business, who has no skin in the game. And it's totally exasperating. That's one of the primary reasons for you as a business owner to put that firewall between you, is that switch of business operator brain to compliance brain is really difficult to do, especially as you're trying to do a small entity that is already pulling you in a million different directions.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead.
One thing I'd like to add is that it does seem very recently that there's some new energy coming out of AMP, and if they may be a partner in this that can help more than perhaps they have in recent times. If we had a truly active membership organization that can give us some strength and can give us, and they've got contacts, and they might be somebody that's got enough clout to be listened to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, when we initially started NMPAN, it was at a time where there were 2 trade associations that worked with small and very small processors. One was AMP, one was NAMP. NAMP went away. The regional trade associations, many of them have been great, especially in states like Minnesota, Mike. And it was also at a time when FSIS had not yet really taken seriously, oh, we've got to work with small plants. And they started to get organized around the same time. And so I think that we established NMPAN not ever as a processor trade association, but what's happened is that we've become a place where a lot of processors are talking to each other about issues that maybe they would want to talk about in a trade association, but we're trying to do it with a full supply chain set of partners here. So I am definitely interested in reestablishing more of a relationship with AMP. So that's a great comment, Joe. Other questions that we have about 5 more minutes here, and I'm wondering if the panelists have any questions for each other. Heather has one. Go ahead.
It's so nice to actually have time to talk to some great peers. How's everyone feeling about SQF these days? We're running into some barriers in having access to markets at bigger store chains like Whole Foods or Wegmans without SQF processing. So that's one of the impetuses for us bringing some of our processing off-site. So I'm just kind of curious if anyone's thought about SQF, is running into the same problem, and if anybody has any advice.
Let me take a little bit of a crack. We've never gone through SQF. We went through our first third-party audit about 10 months ago, because we were still working with Chipotle at that time and processing for two local, because of Polyface's connection. That doesn't exist anymore. And we did pass the audit, but I think that Chipotle had their thumb on the scale. And what did come out of that is that the passed with the minimum points that we could have gotten to pass, but we also got this massive list of corrective actions that they expected us to take. And a lot of them were administrative, but then some of them were expensive facility things, and I'm not quite sure. Eventually, we'll hopefully get to them, but that was an enormous burden on me because as Mike had just pointed out, I personally had to deal with all of that. At the same time, I was trying to deal with all the financing and for this expansion, the planning for this expansion, and it's a huge burden. You are going to have that, though, to get it. That's what I'm realizing. The same as with the technology. If I want to help get my customers to scale and get access to these supply chains, then we are going to have to go through that. I've been to multiple meetings with a consortium of 5 of the universities in Virginia, and they keep saying that they want to provide local food, and local meat, and they insist that they want to do that, but then they never buy any, and they all have, everything has to go through Aramark to do that. Aramark is there at the meeting. Yeah, they say, yeah, we want to do that, but then they walk away and they never actually do anything. And then Aramark has to come through Cisco. And then that's got to go through, you've got to have third-party certification. You've got to have barcodes and traceabilities and all of that. And until you get that, you're not gonna crack that case. So it's a difficult challenge. I don't know what to say beyond the fact that we need to do it. You're going to have to keep pushing at it, and it's not going to change. It's only going to get worse, is what I feel like, if we want to get to those markets.
So our facility here in Minnesota is SQF, and when I have my owner hat on, I really like SQF, as I can tell the marketplace. As an owner, we've done every reasonable thing to assure that our plant is operating at the next level. So I like it from that standpoint. It does get to be a little, it does get to be a challenge on some of the requests they make. It takes a lot of money day to day to comply with SQF beyond, even if your facility's in tip-top shape, there's the record keeping and the additional training standards and stuff cost you money day in and day out, and you need a certain volume. We haven't done it in the plant in Vermont. Arian and I haven't talked about it lately. Personally, I have an aspiration to someday get to SQF in Vermont, but right now that the business is coming at us fast enough that we don't have to do it. Right this second, we just do a third-party audit, and that's enough. But I do hear in what Joe is saying that whole deal with, these are all barriers to entry into the marketplace, that you have to have a certain volume of product going through the building just to justify the cost of addressing them, because they all cost money. Thank
you very much, Mike. We are at our 75-minute mark, and I want to respect folks' time. This has been an amazing webinar. I've learned yet again so much, which is, why we started NMPAN in the first place, is for folks to learn from each other. There are some more questions coming in, and actually this last one here from Thomas, who's in South Africa and is using the NMPAN network to think about starting his own business. So if panelists have a chance to address any of these questions in the next few seconds, great. If not, I would encourage anyone who has posted a question that didn't get answered to send it on to the NMPAN listserv, or send it on to Rebecca, our program manager, or to me. If you're on the NMPAN list, you have our contact info. If you're not on the NMPAN list, please join the NMPAN list.
But I was just going to jump in and say, if folks will go ahead and get their question in, we'll have transcripts of the Q&A and chat. So, you know, if you all want to take the time after the fact, you'll have the opportunity to respond back in
Right.
if you like.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for spending this time with us away from their businesses, which take all of their time to run, and for sharing their experiences and being part of the network all this time. So thank you very much for all that you do. And thanks to our audience for being here. This is all going to be posted to our YouTube channel, and I am seeing that a lot of our webinars that go on YouTube get a lot more views after they're posted. So it's a great way that we're going to be sharing what folks have shared today. So thank you very much. Mark, do you have any parting things?
Nope.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks a lot, everyone.